Well, hello there. How are you doing today? It's nice to see you. I don't know where in the world you are watching me from, but wherever you are from, if it's the morning, if it's the evening, I hope you are having a really good day. My name is Maria Wich-Vila, and I'm the founder of Applicant Lab. And today I'm going to be talking about what's the most important thing in MBA admissions. And this is, hold on, let me share my screen so we can pull on over to here. So this is an interesting topic because the folks at GMAT Club, when they approached me about doing this topic, they said, well, you know, Maria, there's a lot that goes into the MBA application, whew, right? And so people often want to know, like, okay, fine, you know, it's a holistic process. If you ask admissions officers, right, they always say, it's a holistic process. There's no one thing that does it. But come on, there's got to be some things that are like more important than others. And in fact, if we had to pick what was the most important thing, what would that be? And so I have some thoughts. And so we're going to cover those today. But first of all, in case you don't know who I am, who am I? My name's Maria. Hi. I am a 2005 graduate of Harvard Business School, and I am the founder of ApplicantLab.com, which is the DIY solution to admissions consulting needs. So if you are looking to apply to business school and you start to realize that this is actually a pretty complicated process, and I need some help maybe and some guidance, and then you start looking into admissions consultants and what they charge, whew, they charge a lot of money. In fact, admissions consultants of my caliber, I have been doing this now for almost 20 years. I'm in my 19th year of helping people get into business school, and I am an HBS graduate. And so folks at my sort of experience range do tend to charge $400 to $500 an hour. I don't necessarily think that that's how I want to run my business. And so what I did instead is I took all of those years of experience and expertise, and instead of meeting with you one-on-one and charging you $10,000 to talk to me, I have created ApplicantLab.com. And so what Applicant Lab does is it replicates step by step the exact same process that a traditional admissions consultant would go through with you. You know, starting with let's create your strategy, let's come up with your career vision, all the way through to writing the essays, the resume, the interview, all of it. But it is an online platform, and you get 12 months of access for $349. So that's like literally everything you need for less than the cost of what otherwise the market dictates I could charge you for 1 hour of my time, because I am trying to level the playing field. And so for years, I would tell people it's kind of like the turbo tax of of admissions, but then I realized that's kind of an outdated example. So sort of the example I'm using now is it's kind of like a Peloton. So here on the screen, we see Robin Arzon, celebrity fitness trainer. I looked up her website, and if you want Robin Arzon to come and speak to your organization, she charges $75,000. Or so I could do that. I could try to find her and pay her $500 for a personal training session, or I could sign up for the Peloton app, and I could get to see Robin Arzon every day in my house for only $13 a month. And so when you think about it, technology has allowed us access to experts that we otherwise wouldn't be able to talk to or afford, or people whose schedules simply wouldn't line up with our own. And so that is what I have done with Applicant Lab. I'm leveling the playing field for everyone. And if you want to use Applicant Lab, there's a couple of different ways you can use it. Number one, if you can go through it and just use it on your own completely by yourself, that's fine. If you want to get extra advice or feedback from friends, you can do that. I provide checklists within the lab that you can provide them to sort of say, hey, am I hitting the right notes in this checklist? I also have a team of lab alumni. So these are folks who used the lab a couple years ago, got into business school, went to business school, and now they are paying it forward by providing resume reviews and essay reviews and mock interviews, but at a lower fee than what other admissions consulting firms charge. Or if you're already working with another admissions consultant, no problem. You could use the lab for your foundation work and then hire another consultant for just a couple of hours here or there. Or if you're doing like a full whole enchilada package with someone else, why not pay for the lab and use it kind of as an insurance policy or to get a second opinion? Because admissions consulting is not a licensed field, and there are a lot of people out there who sometimes some people are really, really good at this job, and sometimes people don't really know as much, but they present it in a very confident way. And so why not just get a second opinion from someone else just to see if the other person is saying stuff that is the best advice possible. So with that out of the way, what are the key pieces of an application? Oh, here's what we're going to talk about. So within the application, you've got your GMAT and your GPA and your essays and your resume and your recommendations. Whew. And the short answer, these are the little boxes inside the application form that you have to fill out. And then if all of the written stuff goes well, you will be invited to interview. And then there are also these aspects of your candidacy that are, a little bit less concrete. But you're going into this process, you need to have an idea of what is it you want to do with your career? Like, what kind of change and leadership do you want to push through in the world? Like, where do you see yourself going in the world, and what impact do you want to make in the world? Why do you need an MBA specifically to make that impact? And why do you need an MBA from this school specifically to make that impact? And then in the middle of all of this is leadership. And the cool thing is that you should keep in mind is that all of these different gears all have to go together, right? All of the different elements of your application have to be turning in the same direction, because if they're not, let's say your resume says that you are very, very quantitative, but your career vision is one that is very creative, but you're not giving me evidence that you're creative, then, these two things are going to go in different directions. So in terms of the importance, if we had to quantify the importance, what I've shown you here is the results of a poll that GMAT, which is the organization that issues the GMAT, several years ago, they polled over 100 admissions officers, and they said, okay, well, how much percentage of importance would you give to each one of these different pieces? And so right now, what I want to focus on is to start with is the GMAT, because I think the GMAT or the GRE, I'm going to probably say GMAT, but when I say GMAT, I mean GMAT, GRE interchangeably, whatever the standardized test is. Because I think the standardized test is the thing that people tend to obsess the most over. And that makes sense because it's very visible. It's very quantitative. It's very easy and quick to say, I have a 760 versus I have a 690. People like to think that it's like, okay, this is my automatic way of gauging exactly how competitive I am. But first of all, the GMAT's important. It's 20%, but I actually think that's going to start going down because there are all these test waivers happening now. So, I think it's not as important as people think it is, for starters. That's the first thing I want to show you here. So sometimes I meet people who are like super impressive, and I'm like, wow, why didn't you're a little too old for a 2-year MBA. Why didn't you apply a few years ago? And they're like, oh, because I was taking the GMAT over and over and over again for like 6 years. And I'm like, oh no, but you realize that it is important, but it's not the only important thing. So let's talk about what is the role of standardized tests. Why do they even ask us to do them? And I'm telling you this because I think it'll help kind of put in perspective where the standardized test fits in terms of, is it the most important thing? So on the basic level, the test tells me, can this person do the work at my school? Right? Because business school is still school. You actually have homework and stuff. Oh, I know. So first of all, if I put this person in my classroom, are they going to do okay? Or are they going to be struggling and panicking and, oh, I can't figure this out and this is too difficult and maybe I should quit? On a deeper level, the test really does help level the playing field because so many of us come from radically different academic backgrounds, right? Some people go to Caltech or MIT, and they major in neurocomputational physics. I don't even know if that's a thing. I just made it up, right? They might major in something really, really difficult at a really, really difficult university, or they might have gone to a university that isn't very rigorous and major in something that isn't very rigorous. So first of all, when you see people talk about the GPA, just keep in mind that the GPA is not really a great metric at all. I'm not even going to go into it actually in this presentation, except for mentioning it on the side right now, just because if let's say I had gone to an easy university and I had majored in Spanish, I grew up speaking Spanish, guess what? My GPA would have been a 4.0. Like, huh. So the GPA alone doesn't necessarily tell you what you need to know about someone's academic horsepower. So number one, the use of these standardized tests is it helps me get a sense of like, okay, we've got these people who have completely different academic backgrounds. How can we try to compare them side by side? And then For the very, very overrepresented groups within the applicant pool, there are people in the applicant pool, hundreds of people who come from similar buckets, right? Management consultants is one bucket. Engineers is another bucket. You know, even within like the nonprofit world, there's a certain bucket of people who work for foundations or in the nonprofit world. And so when people are all from the same bucket and they have very similar resumes and the resumes and the accomplishments all kind of start to look the same, then in that case, the test score can be a way for me to try to differentiate and say, okay, well, you know, I've got these 5 different chemical engineers who have all worked in the petroleum industry and they have all done the same thing. And one of them has a 760 and one of them has a 560. Why not take the person with a higher score, right? Why not place that bet? So it can be sort of a bit of a tiebreaker if all else is equal, especially for people from very overrepresented groups. On a more cynical level, the GMAT score plays an outsized role in determining a school's rankings. So if you start to look at the methodologies of how everyone's familiar with the rankings, right? Oh, the US News rankings, the Financial Times ranking. But if you actually dig into, okay, so how do they figure out that ranking? The GMAT score carries a lot of weight. And so if I'm an admissions officer and I think to myself, okay, I know that I need to try to be at least cognizant of my school's average GMAT score, because if my average goes down, or you know, if I can get it up higher, that's going to help me in the rankings. It's going to help me. It's going to be a good news story if I can, you know, inflate my GMAT score. So all else being equal, if I'm an admissions officer, why wouldn't I take the person with the higher score? Because it helps my school look better. And by the way, if I am aiming to have a certain average for my GMAT for my entering class, and there is someone that is like super impressive that I'm madly in love with, but who has a lower score, if I let in someone with a higher score, they can balance that out. So I can still hit that same average that I'm targeting, but you know, the higher score person is allowing me to bring in this other person and then they can balance out. So I think when we talk about academics in general, the academic background, it's basically it's a hurdle that you have to cross. The basic hurdle is, can I handle the work? And so basically, like, okay, have I shown them either through my test score or through my previous coursework that, you know what, guys, I can handle it. You put me in a statistics class, you put me in an accounting class. I'm not gonna throw myself out of the window. I'm gonna be able to handle it. I'm not gonna be up crying at 2 in the morning. I'm not gonna be dropping out. Like, I can handle it. Once you cross that hurdle, then, assuming your score is high enough to cross the hurdle, then you start to be compared against the other people in your competitive cohort. So all else being equal, yeah, the person with the 760 is going to be in an advantage of the person over the 700. But in case things aren't equal, that doesn't mean that the person with the 700 is automatically out. Because if the person with the 700 actually has a much better profile in other aspects, which is what the rest of the presentation is going to be about, that person could actually get in. As long as they cross that hurdle. You know, I was recently, let me give you an example. I was recently examining some folks from the military who had applied to business school, and one person had like a 760, but maybe their job was a little bit more administrative, like they were in charge of making sure of some administrative tasks happening within the military, and the other person had a 730, but they had led people in battle. They had literally been a commander of soldiers in a battlefield scenario. In that case, yeah, the person with the 760, oh, they have the higher score, therefore they're getting in. No, because the person with the 730, they've shown me that they've crossed that hurdle. I'm not uncomfortable. I'm comfortable that I could let that person with the 730 into my class and they would do fine. And so at that point, it's not about the 760 versus the 730. It's about, okay, the person with the 760, they haven't done a whole lot in terms of like leadership, but this other person has done probably the hardest act of leadership that exists, which is convincing other people to run behind you and possibly die, right? I can't think of any other, you know, you think your job's hard. Whew, you've never had to convince someone to follow you into battle. So it's kind of an interesting, like, yes, it's important, but it's not necessarily along this, like, you know, if your score is X, your chances of getting in are Y. If your score is higher, your chances of getting in are higher. It's not necessarily a linear function. And also, not all GMAT scores are treated equally. So within a competitive field, as I alluded to before, if there are a ton of, software engineers and they all have pretty similar, the example I just gave from the military, those are two pretty different work experiences, right? But in the case where a lot of people have very similar work experiences, like I led a team of 5 to build a new database that did this, and someone else led a team of 5 that did build a new database, and someone else led a team of 5, then at that point, then that test score does become more important. Not because the test score itself is intrinsically more important, but just because if I'm comparing different people and I need to pick one, why not pick the one with the higher score? And so to sort of try to illustrate this point, I have this little chart. And so what we've got here are the average GMAT scores, sort of as the line. And then across the bottom, I sort of took some of the major schools and I ordered them kind of in a very unscientific, the perceived difficulty of acceptance. So Stanford, Harvard, Wharton, Booth. I don't want you to squint and look at this. The main point I want to make is, so the red line, this sort of pink line across here, is the average score, right? And if you look, Wharton, Booth, Sloan, and Columbia Business Schools, technically, they all have a higher GMAT average than Harvard Business School does, right? Wharton at 733, Booth at 732, Harvard's at 727. However, hopefully everyone knows that getting into Harvard is much, much, much harder to get into than some of these other schools. So, but wait a minute, if it were just about GMAT, then it would be a straight line, right? It would be like a line that goes like, whoop, it would just have a very nice little slope and there would be a direct correlation. And yet there can't be a direct correlation because there are some schools that are a lot harder to get into that have lower average GMATs. So is the test score the most important thing, or is it very important? It depends. It's super important if it's so low that they think you're not going to do well in the class, or if it's relatively low compared to other people in your competitive bucket. But it's certainly not the most important thing. A good test score is necessary, but by itself, it will not get you in. If that were the case, we would see a nice little straight line. And so the biggest takeaway is, if you're just getting started on this admissions journey and you happen to have done very well on the GMAT, congratulations, but that doesn't necessarily mean, people are like, oh, I got a 760, so that means I'm getting in to all these schools. And it doesn't necessarily mean that at all. So I've debunked that myth, hopefully. So let's move on. What is the single most important thing of admissions? The single most important thing of admissions is actually, we have to think to the future. And we have to think, what does the school want? What's the most important thing to the school? And the most important thing to the school is the school's brand. Like, what do other people think about this school? Because the thing is that for business schools, there's no licensing test at the end of business school, right? It's not like a medical school where you say, aha, 80% of our graduates all pass the board exam, or 90% of our law school graduates all pass the bar exam. There's no licensing test at the end. So you can't really quantifiably say, well, this school is better than the other school. The starting salaries at a lot of these schools are pretty similar, right? Because the same recruiters come to a lot of the same schools and they offer the same compensation packages. So you can't necessarily use, the salary as a way to judge them. So what drives the brand of a school? It's the public perception of the school. And what drives the public perception of a school more than anything are its alumni. The school that sends people out into the world that become famous, hopefully for good reasons, not for evil reasons, who become successful, who change the game, who are known as trailblazers, who are known as revolutionaries, whatever it is, those alumni are what the school is looking for. Because if those people go out into the world and they do great things and people are like, wow, that person's great. Wait, where did they go to school again? Oh, they went to that school. Yeah, that makes sense. That's a great school, right? That's what the school wants, that cachet, for a number of reasons, but let's just that could be a presentation on its own, but let's just assume the school wants the cachet. They get the cachet by having alumni that do incredible things. And so how do you get strong alumni? You get strong alumni by having strong students, and you get strong students by letting in the strongest applicants. So basically, in a nutshell, I'll come back to this a little bit more. We're going to dig into this topic a little bit more. But basically, the best way to get into an elite business school is to show them that you're the sort of person who is going to become the sort of alumnus or alumna that they are going to be proud of. So just a side note, that up here when I had strong alumni, preferably happy and preferably famous. What do I mean by happy alums? So people who are glad who attended the school. If you go to a business school and then you're really happy that you did it, in the long run, you end up donating more money to the school. You hire other graduates of the same program. So you help everyone, the rising tide lifts all boats. You're helping them and, you help them get good jobs. And that way that also elevates the brand of the school. They say nice things about the school. Some of the rankings actually ask people, like they send out surveys to people like, well, what did you think of your school? Which I think is kind of a silly thing to ask, but some of them do. And because rankings are important, we might think that rankings are kind of dumb, but they're important. And so guess what? They got to play the game. So I want to let in someone who's going to like my school and say nice things about it, either to the survey person or go on GMAT club and say, I'm so glad I went to the school. Also, they donate more money. I put that one twice on purpose. So how do we guess if today's applicant, how can I guess if they're going to be tomorrow's happy alumnus or alumna? Okay, so I ask myself, are they going to be glad that they got an MBA overall, and our MBA from our school specifically? And are they going to be happy with the professional opportunities that they got as a result of that MBA? At the end of those 2 years or 1 year, they're going to look back and they're going to say, yes, this was definitely worth it. And so why I broke these two things out is because another thing that we hear a lot about in the list of things that matter in your application is the why MBA, why our school reason, or the career vision that you apply with. These things are absolutely important, but they're not the most important thing. They're important in admissions insofar as a bad career vision or a bad reason or a weak reason to want to attend a school, that might keep you out. Because the school wants to avoid disappointed people. So you might be, the next amazing genius of business. But if I let you into my school and you're like not going to be happy at the end of it, maybe I should, maybe it's better if you go find somebody else. So if you're like, I'm an amazing candidate, so it doesn't matter what my career vision is. I'm just going to put something crazy. And why our school? Who cares? You should be lucky that I'm applying to you. If you don't have any good reasons that show that you really love the school or that you've really thought about where you want your career to go and how the MBA will help you get there, you might get rejected just because the school doesn't want to take the risk of you being a grumpy, disgruntled graduate 2 years from now. So having a good why MBA reason, a good why our school reason, and a good career vision, they definitely help, but they don't rescue. Like a weaker candidate is not going to get in because someone's going to say, wow, this person's career vision is so inspiring. And I'm so like, that's not it. So in other words, this is kind of similar to the GMAT insofar as like a really low GMAT will probably keep you out, but a high GMAT is certainly no guarantee of letting you in. Similarly, the Y MBA career vision, that stuff, it's the same thing. So going back to this idea about the alumni that are going to make the school proud, et cetera, there's a misconception, I think, that some people have out there. There's kind of a causality. Some people have the causality backwards. So sometimes when I talk to people, they'll say, but Maria, you don't understand. I have to go to Stanford because Stanford is going to turn me into this world-changing entrepreneur, right? Their motto is change lives, change organizations, change the world. I want to become the kind of person who will someday change the world, and that's why I need to go to Stanford. Here's the problem, though. Business school is not about taking someone who is not currently a world changer and turning them into a world changer. And in the case of Stanford's motto specifically, it's about picking people who have already started changing the world and incubating them and helping them grow. So if we use the kind of chicken and egg analogy, the business school isn't about taking a regular egg and transforming it into a championship chicken. It's about finding a champion egg in the first place and incubating it so that it becomes a championship chicken. I should have chosen championship chicken. I should have chosen alliterative combination of words. But see what I'm saying? It's not about, well, I have to go to that school, Maria, because that's the school that's going to transform me into someone completely different. It's not, though. It's not that the school is saying, well, I'm going to take this person who has never really accomplished a whole lot and turn them into someone who accomplishes a lot. You have to have already been someone who has accomplished a lot. And then I'm like, okay, I'm the school. I'm going to sprinkle my secret sauce on you. But I'm pretty confident that you're on your way to do great things regardless of business school. There is a quote that one of the former heads of admissions from Harvard Business School said once that, is a little harsh, a little extreme, I think, but it rings true. She said once, if getting into Harvard Business School would be the most impressive thing about you, then you probably don't have the qualifications or accomplishments to get in. If it would be the most interesting thing about you, then that might be a sign that, like we're not there to become the pinnacle of someone's life. We're looking for people who have already achieved a lot, and this is just going to be one of several other achievements. So I guess I could summarize. I could have just done 5 seconds and then gone to get some coffee. My entire presentation in 5 seconds. The more elite the school is, the higher the bar it sets for applicants of who do we think is going to become the strongest alumnus or alumna. So that explains why Harvard Business School's average GMAT is lower than that of other schools. And yet it's a lot harder to get into Harvard. Not just statistically. I don't just mean by the percentages, it's a 10%, 11%, whatever acceptance rate. I mean, it is qualitatively harder to get in. People who can get into other schools a little bit more easily will not get into Harvard. And if I had to summarize it, it's they're looking at people where they've been right now, and they're trying to project into the future based on what we know about this person right now. Who do we think is going to go on to make the school proud? And that's what it comes down to. But hold on, Maria, what do you mean they're trying to predict who can become an alum? Time machines don't exist. Well, maybe they do, but we just don't know because the people who travel in time have been smart about it. But for the most part, time machines don't exist. So how can they possibly know? Well, because the past, while being an imperfect predictor of the future, is the best possible predictor of the future that we have. So basically, people who have been making good things happen in one time period and across multiple time periods can be expected to be the sorts of people who make good things happen in future time periods. And so the cycle continues. So what does it mean then to have and demonstrate the leadership potential that a school is looking for? So here's my sort of definition of leadership. Being a positive change agent who steps forward to solve problems, ideally in a new way, not a requirement, but ideally let's do something a little bit different around here, while getting the best out of other people in the process. To be clear, leadership involves other people. Leadership is not, I went alone by myself and I locked myself in a cave and I came up with the solution to the problem that saved the day. That's an accomplishment, but that's not leadership because it doesn't involve other people. And as you rise in your career, part of the reason why the schools do this is they have decades of records, decades of data of here are the students we let in 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 40 years ago. And then here's the results of the personality tests and the assessments that we gave them then. And now let's see where they are 40 years later. And the people who tend to rise to the top, it is more about getting other people to believe in you, other people to take your, to be able to negotiate with them, to be able to take your side in an argument, to be able to overcome conflicts. That's what really elevates people from being merely technically competent to being sort of senior executive leadership material. So if I had to break out the ingredients of leadership into kind of 3 major buckets, in the years that I've been doing this, here's what I have sort of distilled it down to. The first is innovation, thinking about better ways to do things. When I say innovation, I don't mean you have to I'm going to invent a new prosthetic arm that can, make me a sandwich. It doesn't have to be something crazy, but just the sort of person who's always kind of looking around and saying well, what could we do better? This thing that we're doing, it's just not, can we make it better? Could we do it faster? Could we do it cheaper? someone who's not satisfied with the status quo. Initiative, actually raising your hand and saying like, okay, no one else wants to do that thing. You know what? I'll do it. Or, hey, boss, I've got this great idea. I'm going to be brave enough to sort of raise my hand and say, why don't we try this? Or, gee, everyone on my team really wants to invest in this company. I don't think it's a good idea. Like, I don't think that company is a good investment. I know I'm like the youngest person in the room, but gosh, guys, I don't think we should invest. Whatever that is, sort of taking the initiative to step forward instead of just sitting back and being like, well, these people are a bunch of dummies. Huh. And then not doing anything about it. Like, ooh, that idea is dumb, but I'm not gonna stick my neck out and say anything. And then persuasion. You can have the best idea in the world. You could be the smartest person in the world. But if nobody likes you, they're not going to implement your idea. And this is actually one of the biggest reasons. This is often the biggest disconnect. When people get really high GMAT scores and then they're like, aha, this is all it takes. It's not, because how many of us have ever worked with people who are geniuses, like honest to God geniuses, but who think so highly of themselves or who can't communicate basic concepts that you're like, I don't really want to work with you, or I don't really like you. I'm not really going to help you. Right. So these three things for me are the core of leadership. So hopefully throughout the course of your application, you can demonstrate that you have one or more of these traits. And just to be clear, by the way, what I'm getting at, and I'm going to dig more into this a little bit more later, is this doesn't mean that your application is about, I solved this very complicated algorithm, or I went through 4 billion terabytes of data and I did the regression analysis. Like, it's not about showing the admissions officers how smart you are, quote unquote. That's not what they're looking for, right? The GMAT score will tell me that you're smart. Fine. What I'm looking for are the people who have the personality traits that are going to help them succeed. So one way that they judge this is they try to look at, okay, how much change have you driven? How much impact have you had? That word impact gets thrown around a lot. I think the word change is a better substitute for that. How were things going before you got there? And how were they better after you weren't, after you were done? Put another way, if you weren't there, how would things have gone not as well? So let's say the example of, there's a product being built and you're a software engineer on that team and you're just like, you know what, man, this product is just not going to be, it's not the good use of our resources. We should make another product instead. Were you able to convince other people to not make that product? And was your idea launched instead? And was your idea actually better for the company? And therefore, did you benefit the company in a very positive way? So in terms of moving mountains or overcoming challenges, it's not about you by yourself trying to push a mountain. Those stories are not good for business school. It's more about getting other people to join you in pushing the mountain together. That's what's going to make a stronger leadership story than any story where you were the solo, I was the superhero by myself. Now, the good news is that the mountain is viewed in context, right? So somebody working at a big company is obviously going to move, they're going to have a larger team probably and more resources. Somebody maybe at a smaller nonprofit, in terms of quantitative terms, maybe the mountain isn't as big. Maybe the impact wasn't in the millions of dollars. Maybe it was in the hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. Or maybe part of their impact was helping somebody else get up the mountain. But the mountains can be viewed in context. So don't think like, oh, gee, I don't work at a huge company, and so therefore I haven't launched a huge thing. That's not about it. It's about where you've been. Have you been someone who pushes through positive change? So Kirsten Moss, who is now unfortunately the outgoing head of admissions at Stanford, once told a story about, some students that she accepted, that she let in, who had attended community college in the US. And you might think, for those of us in the US, community college is usually seen as being less than a full, people who are snooty might sort of say like, oh, community college. But she said, look, this person didn't go to Yale or MIT or Princeton or Harvard for college, but they had gone to only, quote unquote, a community college. But in that community college, they were student body president, and as student body president, they didn't just sit around, because sometimes people get elected into these positions in college and they just sit around and don't do anything. No, like this person had like transformed their college, and they had, done all this stuff, and they had, raised, like they had done this incredible thing. So even though the situation was, the mountain was not as fancy, perhaps, it was certainly within their context, they certainly were able to drive a lot of change. And so this concept, by the way, just as a side note, is like why these cursory profile reviews of like, Maria, I have a 720 GMAT and I have 5 years of experience in oil and gas. What are my chances of getting into Tepper? What? I'm like, I don't know. Like that. This is why admissions processes exist. If it were that easy, then no one would ask for essays ever, right? It's the essays are where you're going to explain the mountains that you moved. And yeah, I can't tell. I have 5 years of experience. I run a factory. Like, okay, well, did you just sit around and, were you negligent in running that factory? I hope not. Were you doing the bare minimum in that factory, running that factory? Okay, not great. Or did you look around and say, guys, this factory is really dumping a lot of pollution into the local river. We need to do something about that. And there's no budget for that? Okay, well, I'm going to figure out a budget effective way for us to do. And see what I'm saying? Like in that case, think of the change, the delta between before this person was involved and after this person was involved. You're trying to show that you're the sort of person who creates that positive delta. And the other good news is that adcoms have seen lots of mountains, so they are pretty familiar with a lot of different contexts. If you have a super unique context, then part of your job in the application is to tell them what your context is. So you need to, so in order to be like a really competitive candidate, you have to have accomplished things that are sort of notable or at least above average on some level, right? Going above and beyond. So, someone who shows up and does the bare minimum is not really the sort of person a business school wants to let in, just because historically they know that people who do the bare minimum don't often advance to, the C-suite, as it were. And then within the application, you have to now tell them how you did it, focusing on the details that convince them that you have the interpersonal strengths to go really far. So not focusing on the details of the analysis that you did and I ran the database or whatever, like focusing on the details of here's how I convinced other people to join me in this project. So if I had to break out the applicant pool into kind of buckets, I think there are some people who are going to get in just based on pedigree, right? Just based on the resume, just based on the accomplishments alone. So let's say it's 2%, let's say between 2 to 5% of people out there. Honestly, you just sort of look at you're like, okay, they went to this school and they work at this company and they've done, okay, great. Like the essay that they submit doesn't have to be all that strong because it's like, you're so impressive. I'm just going to let you in. And by the way, this is why reading lots of sample essays is not necessarily a good idea, because someone might have gotten into a school despite their essay and not because of it. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes people, they submit terrible essays, but they still get in because they're amazing. And so, of course, that's what I want. I want that amazing person to come to my school. There are some people who, for any given school, are just not really qualified. They're just not at the same level of accomplishment. Many candidates are in fact qualified for most schools, but the goal then becomes telling your story in a way that shows these people in the admissions office that you're the sort of person that they're looking for, certainly more so than other people in your bucket. So if you work in an environment where you haven't necessarily had a chance to lead lots of others, it might be okay because maybe other people in your competitive bucket also haven't had that opportunity. So within your bucket, have you demonstrated these personal skills? So going back to like, what's the most important part of the application? Okay, so we've got the resume and the essays. We haven't touched upon those yet. We've talked about test scores, career vision, why MBA. So the resume and the essays. The resume serves to tell them what you accomplished. The resume is going to be your greatest hits. The role of the resume is to help me see at a glance, how does a particular candidate stack up against other people, right? What are their big highlights of things that they've accomplished? It's kind of like the quick, like, okay, here's what they've done. The essays, however, tell me how you accomplished it. And this is important because two people might have the same accomplishment, but they might have done that accomplishment in very different ways. So two people might say, okay, I built a product that saved us $1 million a year. And another person might say, at a similar company in a similar role, I built a product that saved us $1 million a year. But maybe one person did it by screaming at everyone and threatening to fire them and withholding the paycheck. You're not gonna get paid until you finish this right? Or maybe the other person did it by convincing other people to work late, or going to the vice president and saying like, hey, like, have we thought about doing this? Like, what about this? What's that? You don't have the money. You're not convinced? Well, let me convince you. Let me do a pilot program that then convinces, right? Same accomplishment, very different ways to get to that accomplishment. And that's where leadership, the devil is in the details of how you do something, not simply what you did. So in the essays, what I'm looking for as an admissions reader is not so much what was done, what was accomplished, because I already know that. And also, that's not what I care about. If that's all I cared about, I would only ask for a resume. I wouldn't even bother ask. Why even bother? Why waste my time reading a bunch of essays if I don't care what's going to be? I'm just going to do the rest. I'm just going to look at the resume. So is this leadership style one that's sustainable? And is the leadership style one that points to someone who, when they go into the corporate world, or they go into consulting, or they go into nonprofit management, or whatever that might be, that they will continue to rise through the ranks? People are going to want to work with them. People are going to say, wow, I really enjoyed that partnership that I did with that other company. This person was great to work with. At a minimum, we want to avoid embarrassment, right? I don't want, and let me tell you something, the schools don't get it perfect. I have met some graduates of Harvard Business School that are major cringe, as the kids today would say. I've met some people from Harvard who are horrible. Like I once worked at a startup where they hired an HBS person after me, and they were like, okay, it's a startup. It's, we're testing the new launch, we got to stay and do QA until, 2 a.m. And literally this guy was like, I went to Harvard Business School. I don't do QA. Gross. That's embarrassing. That's embarrassing for the school. I am embarrassed vicariously by that person's behavior. And I can assure you that if HBS had, like, this person just faked their way through, if HBS had figured out that that's the sort of person this guy was, they wouldn't have let him in, because it's embarrassing. And then because why? That starts to develop the reputation. Oh, HBS people, you know what they're like. They think they are too cool. They think they are too good to do stuff. That's not the reputation that the school wants. So the essays, that's where you explain how you accomplished it. And then in the interview turns you from a two-dimensional piece of paper into a three-dimensional person. And it really helps give me a sense of, okay, so now that I've met you, do I like you? Do I believe that you've got that EQ, that emotional intelligence that I want? Do I think you'll be happy if you come here? Or are you going to be one of those disgruntled graduates a couple years from now? On a more pragmatic level, another thing the interview tries to find out is, if you are applying to a school that is in another country, where the classes are in a different language, or the recruiters recruiting for those jobs, their work environment is one in which a different language is spoken. Can I understand what you're saying? And do I believe that if I put you in front of my corporate recruiters, that they will say, okay, I'm so glad I bothered, I'm a recruiter from Amazon, and I just flew all the way out to Hanover, New Hampshire to interview Tuck students. And you know what? I'm so glad I did, because I met so many great candidates for my company. I love this school. I love the students they accept, right? It's not just about like the short term of, okay, do I think you'll be good for this school, right? I think an important thing to think about is this idea that the admissions officers are looking at you across various timeframes. Are you going to be someone that the corporate recruiters like? And then in the long term, are you going to go on to make the school proud? Okay, Maria, so what is the most important thing? If I had to distill it into one thing, it's proving that you're going to make the school proud in the future. And you do that via various pieces of the application. First of all, you have to have been the sort of person who hopefully has been trying to step up in some way, has been trying to lead in a positive way, has been trying to drive positive change. But regardless of what your accomplishments are, describing those accomplishments well. If you've achieved those accomplishments through other people, showing me how do you work with other people. Um, Showing me that you have the sorts of skills that make someone that sort of separate the people who do advance into those C-suite positions from the people who don't. And these are these more qualitative skills like being able to make contacts, being able to persuade powerful people, right? It's very easy to persuade someone who works for you because you just say, I'm not going to pay you if you don't do what I say. Hey, I'm so good at persuasion. The thing is that in the real world, you're going to have to persuade people over whom you have no authority. And so can you do that? You're probably going to work with a struggling team at some point. Can you motivate those people? So showing that you have these sorts of skills that the school knows helps predict who goes to the top, that's important. And so you do that through the application in the ways I just described. Am I going to be proud to put you in front of corporate recruiters and alums? And then going back to the GMAT score / the academic side of things, are you intelligent enough to be impressive, but not impressed with your own intelligence? So nobody, I don't want recruiters to come to my school and then say, wow, that person they were so nice, but not the sharpest tool in the shed. That's not good for the school's brand. However, so you do have to be intelligent, but certainly not satisfied with your own intelligence because that's really off-putting. And that's going to be embarrassing on a qualitative sort of emotional level. At a minimum, can they handle the work at our school? And then in the case where tons of applicants have almost identical resumes, like, sure, the test score is going to be more important because, I got to differentiate somehow. Put yourself in their shoes. You would probably do the same. So that is my take on what is the most important thing in admissions. It's trying to be the sort of person who steps up as much as possible and develops good people skills and good relationships. If that is who you've been, the next step is to describe that well. If that's not who you've been, really ask yourself. In an applicant lab, I have brainstorming exercises that help you think about, like sometimes people say like, oh no, but Maria, I'm not a good leader. I've never done anything with leaders. Like, oh no, am I screwed? And I'm like, a lot of people have more leadership than they know. And when you stop to think about it, and this is part of what the module in applicant lab I call brainstorming, that's what I help you with. I help you realize like, actually, maybe there have been situations you don't have to have been in charge to be a leader, right? You can demonstrate leadership skills or leadership talent, even if you're not even if you're the most junior person in the room. And so that's part of what I try to help you get at. So if you are in the process of applying, thinking about what are they looking for and how am I going to convey that effectively through my essays primarily. So that's my take on things. I've been doing this now for 19 years, so that's just my observations. All right, let me jump into the questions. If you just give me 1 second, I'm just going to take a little sip of water. One moment, please. Please hold. All right, thank you. I was just doing another session before this one, so I've been talking now for 2 hours, which the GMAT club, the poor beleaguered GMAT club team can tell, like, yeah, no, she can talk. All right, so Antonio wants to know, is GPA really that important when one graduated 5 to 10 years ago? Antonio, this is a great question. The more space you put between your GPA and your application, the better. Only because if you think about it, if I'm trying to assemble data points in my head of, okay, who's going to succeed in my program and succeed after my program, when someone is younger, by definition, there are fewer data points. And when there are fewer data points, each data point takes on more importance. Therefore, the GPA matters a lot for younger applicants just because I'm not going to have as much work experience and accomplishments and all that stuff to go off of, right? So if you've had a less than stellar GPA, putting a little bit of space in terms of time between you and the GPA can help. And thinking back to the role of the standardized test being standardized, the benefit is that if you do really, really well in the standardized test, I have found that most GPA issues can be sort of forgiven if your standardized test score is good, because at least you're showing like, no, I really can handle the work. I would hesitate to say, when you say 5 to 10 years ago, I would want to put space between you and those grades. I wouldn't wait 10 years though. On a pragmatic level, if we look at the average years of work experience that people have when they enroll in business school, they tend to have about between 5-6 years for most of the full-time programs. Europe is a little bit older. But so don't say, oh, well, Maria told me I have to put space between, so I'm going to work 10 years and then I'm going to apply. That might be a little too late. Okay. Honest Bishop wants to know which schools give the highest weightage to GMAT score. So, I think that's an interesting, it's sort of like a circular question. I think all else being equal, of like the top 3, I think Wharton and Booth care more about GMAT score than Harvard and Stanford. Now, Stanford, you're like, but that doesn't start. Stanford has the highest GMAT score. Like, of course they care about. I think Stanford cares about GMAT score, but not so much. If they find someone who is like an amazing leader, I've seen Stanford forgive lower GMAT scores in exchange for someone who really has started to change the world. So, versus I do think that a high GMAT score can make up for other aspects of a candidacy for other schools. I think that some schools that are trying to work their way up the rankings have recently, and when I say recent, I mean 10 years, in the past 5-10 years, have started shifting more of an emphasis to GMAT score. So for example, 15 years ago, Yale was primarily seen as like the social enterprise school. And so if you had a strong social enterprise background, but now they've been trying to shift and become more of a general school, and they're trying to raise in the ranking. So I've seen Yale, for example, put more emphasis on GMAT scores than they used to. Any school that is trying to kind of go up in the rankings, the most recent, most cynical example of this is USC. USC is playing some pretty blatant games. They really are trying to manipulate themselves in the ranking. But so anyway, if we think about the fact that the average GMAT score matters to a school in terms of the rankings, then any school that is trying to move up in the rankings is going to be more predisposed to letting someone in who has a higher GMAT score, because it will try to push that average up a little bit, right? So I think that sort of the I think certain schools are, I think Yale's one of them. I think USC is another one. Arizona, Cary is also doing that. And by the way, as a side note, if getting a full scholarship is something that is really important to you, then apply to schools where your GMAT score is like 50, 60, 100 points higher than that school's average, because they might be willing to overlook a lot of things because they're like, ooh, look at what this person's higher is like. This higher score really does help us with our averages. And so, they are more willing to throw money at people, frankly. A lot of schools that give the sort of merit-based scholarships do it to buy higher GMAT scores. That's cynical, but it's true. Do schools convert the GPA to 4.0 for what? So Prince, your question about schools, GPAs, international students, every single business school has a different instruction. So some business schools will say, don't bother converting, just upload your transcript as is and we'll take care of the rest. Some schools will say, tell us what your GPA was on whatever scale. So don't convert it to a 4.0 scale. If you're on a 10 scale and your GPA is like 8.2 out of 10.0, then put that. Other schools might say, yeah, try to use this conversion. I know there's like this conversion type of thing out there. The schools will tell you what they want. But either way, you're going to submit your whole transcript. And in most cases, they will actually glance at the transcript just to see, because the GPA number by itself doesn't tell me, was there an upward trajectory? Was there a downward trajectory? Was like all the A's were in classes like staring at the wall 101, staring at the wall 102, and all the, calculus a D, or oh no. So the GPA is a good start, but just follow the instructions. Okay, where am I? If you're an overrepresented group like Indians, is the GMAT score higher for them? So usually, yes. In fact, if you look at the averages by country, GMAT will publish, here's how many people in this country this year took the GMAT, and here was the average score. It was this many people in Argentina, and it was this many people in Haiti, and it was this many people in France, or whatever it is. So if you look at those averages, the Indian students tend to score about 30 points higher on average than other we take the global average, or if you take the US average. And I realize that is that sometimes the response is like, oh, it's because Indian students are more intelligent, and this is sort of biased against us. However, the Indian education system is one that is highly, highly, highly test focused. So someone who has grown up in the Indian education system is used to taking high stakes tests, apparently since birth. Like, it's like the testing never, like, oh, I was 4 years old and I got the IJTCT, when I'm like, oh God. So in a culture where the education system is one that prepares people to take lots and lots and lots of standardized tests, it makes sense that something like the GMAT, it's like, oh, it's just another out of multiple important tests I'm going to take. In the US, I took a high stakes test called the SAT. I took a couple of advanced placement exams, but those weren't high stakes. Those weren't to get into college. Those were just when I got to college, I could skip into a higher level. So if I wouldn't have done well, no big deal. The SAT is what was used in college, but it also wasn't that important, right? Because the undergraduate admissions in the US works very similar to business school admissions. And so similarly, like, yeah, the SAT is a high stakes test, but if you don't do so well on it, that's fine, because you can make up for it in other ways. Unlike in other countries where your score on the test is the thing that matters. And so in terms of the preparing for that, I think there was a study once that something like people in India spent, like, I don't remember the exact number. They spent something like 20 times as much time preparing for the GMAT as some people in some other countries. It was something like, it's insane. And so it's like, well, yeah, if you spend 400 hours and the average person spends 80 hours, like, I would hope that you would do better. So anyway, unfortunately, the Indian education system, and China is also similar, are education systems where taking tests is really important. And so as a result, they get a lot better at taking tests. So the average sort of rule of thumb is, all else being equal, an Indian candidate should sort of subtract 20 to 30 points from their GMAT score in terms of the competitiveness. So if a school has an average GMAT of 720, if you were to look at their Indian students, those Indian students might have an average of, say, 750. So sorry, it's like it's like, sorry, you've all been trained to study too hard. Let me see. Okay. Pritika, here's one. What if you're from an underrepresented pool and you got a lower GMAT score? If you complete business finance courses to prove your quantitative mettle, could this offset a lower GMAT score? So yes, if you have a low score, first of all, try to take the test at least one more time if you've taken it once. Also, yeah, like, if you haven't already, like, I recently had a dialogue going back and forth with an applicant lab user who was like, oh, I have the score and it's not that high. And then at the end, after several back and forth, it's like, oh yeah, well, I maybe this time I'll take a study test. I'll prepare. I'll take like a preparation. And I'm like, I'm sorry, you didn't prepare before? Like, you didn't? Okay, maybe that's step one. So if you didn't already do like a formal preparation course, maybe consider retaking. Maybe consider switching to the GRE. But yeah, you can use courses to try to help offset that. And if you are from an underrepresented pool, then that also helps, right? Because you're going to be judged against the other people in your pool. Do schools consider less than 1 year of work experience? Not the good ones. Even if any school lets you in with less than 1 year work experience, that's super suspicious, and you probably shouldn't go because you're not gonna get very much out of the program, you're not gonna give very much to the program. Employers aren't gonna hire someone who has less than 1 year of experience. Like, why would I if I'm a McKinsey recruiter and I come to a business school and someone in front of me only has 1 year experience, great, I'm gonna put you in my analyst program, not my associate program. I'm gonna be like, "This is essentially a fresh college graduate. Why would I give them this higher job?" You're probably not getting in with only 1 year of experience. And if a school does let you in, don't go because I don't think it's probably not a very good school. Schools are betting on you to succeed for them to do. That's right. That's right. Not to be cynical, but if Harvard Business School had never let in anyone successful at all, would we be talking about them? We wouldn't be, or Stanford, any of these schools, right? Hmm. How do applicants showcase that they are persuasive? Could you give an example, please? Sure. So, um, my company wanted to build a new tool that would be an app that teaches chihuahuas how to swim. I thought, this is not a good use of our resources. I went to my boss and I said, I don't think we should be doing this. And he was like, well, tough luck. This is what we're doing. I'm the boss. So then I went and I researched Chihuahua mobile trends and I realized that the Chihuahuas are actually not a very high usage mobile group. And in fact, when they do use the mobile, they don't like to swim. So I came up with a presentation. Now I realized that my boss really likes data. So I made sure that the presentation had lots of data because I know that that's what he responds to. And I know the other person making the decision, the head of marketing, he responds more to emotional. So I created an emotional story for that person about how our team is so burnt out and how this is, and at the end, they agreed with me. The end. That's how you persuade someone. So it's not just about saying, I persuaded them, but actually showing me how did you do it. If you walked in with like a hammer and you're like, I'm going to hit you on the head with this hammer if you don't agree with me, the result might have been the same, but the process could use some work. Shashikant is asking for Stanford, why does the change have to be in the outside world? Why can't changing the world also happen internally? It can. But someone who simply changes their internal selves that's great, but that's not enough for Stanford. I mean, Stanford's the hardest school to get into. Stanford has the highest bar in terms of leadership. You know, that's the highest bar for leadership. So, because past is the best indicator. It's not a perfect indicator of future. It's the best indicator we've got, though. So someone who has already taken steps to try to make the world a better place, or make their companies a better place, or make their industry a better place, or whatever, their campuses a better place. Folks who have done that in the past are more likely to be able to do that in the future, as opposed to someone who's like, oh yeah, I'm totally like, I haven't done that, but I just let me into your school and then I'm totally going to become the sort of person who becomes a change maker. Like, not good enough. What would the hurdle? By the way, GMAT Club people, is this one where I have a hard stop? You guys know by now that if I you just let me go and I'm going to go. Someone who's what would be the hurdle for average for a US applicant? That will differ by the schools, 700 for like, let's off the top of my head, like for the top sort of 20-ish schools, a 700 is kind of that's sort of, there's like a psychological barrier at around 700, but it certainly can go lower. You just really have to look at the schools, individuals, what their profiles are. If Pierre is asking, if you're 37 years old, would I recommend a regular MBA, an executive MBA, or a fellows MBA, which I'm guessing you mean the 1 year? Pierre, it really matters what you are looking for out of the degree. I would not recommend a regular MBA because when you think about it, you would then be in a classroom with people who are 10 years younger than you are. I don't think you're going to learn a lot from them. Right? Just like, and if anyone right now is like, oh, but I'm 24 and I have a lot to teach Pierre. Great 24-year-old. I'm going to put you in a class full of 14-year-olds. Do you think, and any 14-year-olds watching this, great, I'm going to put you in a class with 4-year-olds. Do you think you're going to learn a lot from them? Obviously, that's a dramatic, the difference gets more dramatic the younger you go. But I don't think you would get a lot from the class your classmates at a regular MBA. And the career opportunities might not be great. So I would go for either an executive MBA or the Fellows MBA is a full-time 1-year program. So it's a more intense experience, but you do it quickly. The benefit of the Fellows program is that I think you make much stronger bonds with your classmates because you're all together in one place. And the executive MBA program, though, the benefit is it lets you keep your job and you can keep working. And so you spread out getting that degree over multiple years. Honest Bishop, can a high GMAT compensate for a low GPA? It can. In fact, a high GMAT compensates for a low GPA much more easily than a high GPA compensates for a low GMAT because GPAs are so weird and gelatinous, and versus a standardized test score is like standardized. So yes, if you have a lower GPA, by the way, and you're worried about it, your number one goal right now should be to try to get, if your GPA is lower than average, try to get a GMAT score that's higher than average. 5 years work experience at Amazon. Shaz Nabi is asking, I've got 5 years of work experience with a GMAT of 314. Didn't I just say, like, this is exactly the sort of thing I can't, hopefully, Shaz, if you've been, like, this is the sort of thing I can't answer. I've got 5 years of work experience at Amazon with a promotion. Okay, where in are you doing QA? Are you testing software in that 5 years? Or are you driving a whole new initiative at Amazon in those 5 years? Did you get the promotion because everyone at your job gets the promotion if they just show up and have a pulse? Or did you get the promotion because you went above and beyond and you impressed senior management so much that they increased you? Like, that's the details of the story that make a huge difference. So somebody with 5 years of work experience at Amazon and a promotion might be an amazing candidate or might be a very unimpressive candidate. That's why the schools have essays, so you can explain that stuff. So I can't do these things. Executive assessment versus GRE. Anton, if the schools that you're interested in take the executive assessment, I would apply with that, because right now the executive assessment is not counted in any sort of ranking reporting, and the GRE is increasingly being included. So it's just the only problem is that not a lot of schools take the executive assessment, but if one of yours does and you are not historically a strong test taker, then I think I would choose that one instead. Honest Bishop has a 770 GMAT and a terrible profile, software development 1.5 years. What schools can I target? Well, you can't target any good ones. So could you get it into a business school? Sure, but you shouldn't. What I would tell you, Honest Bishop, is think about what we've talked about here today, and then ask yourself, how can I become that sort of person over the next 3 to 5 years of my career, so that when I do apply in 3 to 5 years, I'm in a stronger situation, right? What are the situations I can have at work where I can raise my hand and say, hey, let's do something different. Let's do something better. Hey, here's a problem that no one seems to be addressing. Let me try to do. If your job doesn't let you do it, do something through an extracurricular activity, right? Find a startup that is looking for free help. Find a nonprofit that could use your organizational skills or your fundraising skills or whatever those skills are. So go above and beyond and start making an impact. Try to lead other people, even if informally. Try to make big changes wherever you go, positive changes, not negative changes. And then that way, in a few years, you will be a strong candidate. Grace wants to know, would I recommend a 1-year program for people who want to make a career shift? So Grace, if you want to make a career shift, the 2-year program is just going to be so much. I know it's an extra year, I know, but it's going to give you that summer internship. It's going to give you a longer time to network with people, to talk to classmates who have done different things, to really start to get a sense of what are the different paths out there. So this 2-year program is definitely more set up for career changers, and the internship kind of gives you that like free sample. Like you can sort of see, like, do I even like this career change? Oh wait, I hate it. Oh no, I need to find something else. But you can make a career shift with a 1-year program. Less opportunities, and also I think they're not set up as much with that in mind. The last question, thank you guys. Okay, I'm not gonna someone else asked a profile question. I'm not gonna, entertain that. Mm, you know what? I'm gonna answer my last question is gonna be Summer's question about applying for a GMAT waiver. Yes. So, the GMAT waiver is a bit of a double-edged sword because since we know that a lot of schools give scholarships to buy higher GMAT scores, I think that people who apply with GMAT waivers may be less likely to get scholarship. I'm not saying they're not gonna get scholarship. I'm just saying if I'm an admissions officer and I have a scholarship pool and I have very specific needs for that pool, and I could use some of that money to tempt someone with a higher score to come to my program. So applying with a GMAT waiver, if someone is just simply not a good test taker, then yes, I think they should apply with a GMAT waiver because I'd rather have them get in and not get a scholarship than not get in at all. Uh, if the question is how to apply for a GMAT waiver, then you basically show them between your coursework and perhaps your professional work that you have the quantitative horsepower necessary to do well in the program. That's usually what they're looking for. It's basically what you would write as an optional essay. If you were applying with a lower GMAT score, there's like an optional essay in the application where you could say, my GMAT score is not representative of my true academic potential or something like that. The GMAT waiver just kind of pulls that process earlier, that step earlier into the process. But yeah, I hope I answered your question, Summer. And I think that's it. So thank you so much, guys. Yes, please check out Applicant Lab. If you like me, if you like my advice, Applicant Lab has a free trial. I've got some goodies in there that you can access for absolutely free. And if you are looking for guidance with your MBA application, do consider signing up for Applicant Lab. The cost benefit is, I really think unparalleled. And I'm not just saying that because it's my product. I really, for the amount that you get, for the amount that you pay, I strive to make it by far the best option in the market. And so I hope you check it out and agree with me. And again, I will be in a Zoom tomorrow. So if you missed me here, maybe I'll see you tomorrow in my Zoom room. All right. Thanks, guys.